I don't want bad police officers. I don't think other police officers want bad police officers. But unfortunately, we can't seem to agree on these common sense measures. As soon as it comes out that a black person is killed by a white police officer, the immediate and viral reaction and assumption is that A, it is racist, that it's a racist motivation, and B, that this happens all the time, that there is an epidemic of white officers killing unarmed black men. And this is the most controversial thing to say, but it is not true. It is not true, and it is loving to say that it is not true. Isn't that good news? That is not actually true, that it is not factual, that epidemic exists. Coleman Hughes, who is black, and he is also a liberal. He is an admitted Biden voter. He wrote an article for City Journal a few months ago called Stories and Data. I'll link it in the description. You can see for yourself. He also links a lot of other studies in the article that you can click on. And again, please research this for yourself. Do not take my word for it, but I'll make it easy for you. You can go and you can look at this article, and you can look at the studies that he included. So in this article, Stories and Data in City Journal, Coleman Hughes talked about how he at one point was fully on board with Black Lives Matter. He was all in on the narrative that racialized police shootings, that it was an epidemic, until he actually started to do the research for himself. Here's what he said. The basic premise of Black Lives Matter, that racist cops are killing unarmed black people, Coleman Hughes says, is false. For every black person killed by the police, there is at least one white person, usually many, killed in a similar way. The day before cops in Louisville barged into Breonna Taylor's home and killed her, cops barged into the home of a white man named Duncan Lemp, killed him, and wounded his girlfriend. Even George Floyd, whose death was particularly brutal, has a white counterpart, Tony Timpa. We already read that story. He talks about how the police officers were cracking jokes and the criminal charges that were brought against them were later dropped. He says you might agree that the police kill plenty of unarmed white people, but you might object that they are more likely to kill unarmed black people, Coleman Hughes says, relative to their share of the population. That's where the data comes in. The objection is true as far as it goes, but it is also misleading. To demonstrate the existence of a racial bias, it is not enough, and this is what is so important. It is not enough to cite the fact that black people comprise 14% of the population, but about 35% of unarmed Americans shot dead by the police. That is the statistic that you will see in the New York Times and the Washington Post and every Instagram infographic out there saying, look, this is an epidemic. This is happening a lot more to the black community than it is the white community. They say that black people comprise 14% of the population, but about 35% of unarmed Americans shot dead by the police. That is misleading, and he explains why. He says, by that logic, you could prove that police shootings were extremely sexist by pointing out that men comprise 50% of the population, but 93% of unarmed Americans shot by cops. But of course, you don't say that. You say, well, men commit the majority of the crimes. They have the majority of interactions with the police. So it makes sense proportionally that they would be, tragically, usually the victims of this. And so that logic to just use population size doesn't work. Coleman Hughes goes on. Instead, you must do what all good social scientists do. Control for confounding variables to isolate the effect that one variable has upon another. In this case, the effect of a suspect's race on a cop's decision to pull the trigger. At least 4 careful studies have done this. One by Harvard economist Roland Fryer, one by a group of public health researchers, one by economist Sindil Mullainathan, and one by David Johnson et al. None of these studies has found a racial bias in deadly shootings. Of course, that hardly settles the issue for all time. As always, more research is needed. I agree with Coleman Hughes on that. But given the studies already done, it seems unlikely that future work will ever uncover anything close to the amount of racial bias that BLM protesters in America and around the world believe exists. So when you control for all factors, when you control for number of police interactions between white and black people, when you control for the factor of the crimes committed between the black community and the white community, there is no, from the data that we have from these studies that he cited, there is no racial bias. There is no disproportionate victimization of black people by the police. We just do not see that according to the data. And there has been study after study showing this. And actually the Roland Fryer study, he is a Black man and he did this study for Harvard University. And he actually went into it thinking that he was going to be able to prove racial bias, and he just didn't find it. Again, read this article for yourself. Look at the studies for yourself. When you control for all factors, which the people who just use the sheer population proportion of the Black community do not control for all factors. When you control for all factors, you do not find, according to this data, that there is a racialization, there is a racial aspect to these police shootings.